Have you ever noticed how the past always seems to get this beautiful, soft focus Hollywood filter applied to it? We instantly picture these noble knights in shining armor, divine Greek gods dispensing absolute perfect justice, and royal queens just kind of sitting passively on their thrones. Well, today, we're going to completely strip away those fairy tales. Our entire goal with this explainer is to dig in and reveal the gritty, complex, and honestly, absolutely fascinating realities of our history and our mythology. Because the truth, it's way messier than the movies. And trust me on this, it is a whole lot more interesting.
Okay, so here's our roadmap for this explainer. We'll be hitting history's illusion shattered, the dysfunctional divine, the miserable medieval reality, Catherine's ambition and empire, the Maya's Red Queen, and finally, redefining women in history. It's going to be a whirlwind chronological tour. We're literally jumping from the mythological heights of Mount Olympus straight down into the absolute muck of 14th century Europe. From there, we'll travel to the freezing, politically ruthless courts of 18th century Russia, and then end up deep in the humid ancient Mesoamerican jungles.
All right, part one, history's illusions shattered. Let's just kick things off right away by dismantling some of those heavily romanticized illusions that pop culture has been feeding us for centuries. So, I really want you to chew on this provocative question as we go. What if everything you thought you knew was a romanticized lie? Kind of wild to think about, right? You can basically consider this explainer an anthology dedicated to busting deeply held historical myths. Because once you actually see the truth, you really can't unsee it.
Moving on to part two, the dysfunctional divine. We usually picture the ancient Greek gods as these grand, stoic figures carved out of gleaming white marble, right? Well, let's just strip that divine veneer right off and expose what was actually a shockingly petty, chaotic, and deeply dysfunctional family dynamic. I mean, just look at Zeus's disastrous HR file. He's supposed to be the king of the gods, the ultimate cosmic referee, but his background is an absolute nightmare. His own father, Kronos, literally had a habit of swallowing his children whole. And Zeus himself, he had absolutely zero understanding of personal boundaries. I mean, he spent an alarming amount of time transforming into various animals, yes, including a goose of all things, just to seduce mortals. And when he wasn't doing that, he was throwing these highly unpredictable lightning bolt tantrums at anyone who didn't sacrifice enough to him. So he was supposed to be this great protector, but in reality, he was a walking PR nightmare from Mount Olympus. And look, this dysfunction of the gods had very real, very tragic consequences in the myths. Take Medusa, for example. We all know her as a terrifying monster, but she actually started out as a devout mortal priestess in Athena's temple. When Poseidon defiled that sacred space by assaulting Medusa, Athena didn't punish the sea god. Nope. She punished the mortal victim. Athena transformed Medusa's hair into serpents and cursed her gaze to turn men to stone. As the source material so powerfully puts it, the weaponization of her trauma was complete. Her tragedy was twisted into a monster myth just to protect the reputation of the gods. It's this incredibly chilling, ancient example of victim blaming, and it really shows how myths were often rewritten by the powerful just to protect themselves. Okay, let's jump into part three, the miserable medieval reality. We're leaving the realm of myth and jumping right into the Middle Ages. So brace yourselves, because we are about to completely shatter the romantic illusion of chivalry, pristine knights, and those grand sweeping castles. Hollywood absolutely loves to show us the noble knight on a pristine white horse. It looks great on camera. But the stark reality? 90% of the population were actually flea-ridden peasants. Seriously, your life was basically a daily endurance test, entirely dependent on surviving the dirt, the rampant disease, and the grueling labor for a lord who, let's be honest, probably didn't even know your name. Let's actually walk through what your miserable daily timeline would look like in, say, the year 1325. You wake up at 5 a.m. in a freezing damp hut, lying on a dirt floor, totally covered in fleas. By 6 a.m., you're having breakfast, but you're not drinking a nice glass of water or a hot cup of coffee. You are drinking weak, low-alcohol beer. Yes, even the kids. And why? Because the water was just absolutely teeming with lethal parasites. By noon, your back is completely breaking from manual labor in the fields. And finally, at 7 p.m., your grand reward is a wooden bowl of pottage. It's this thick, gloopy stew of mystery ingredients that has been continuously simmering over the fire for days or honestly even weeks. Delicious, right? And hey, if you thought the food was rough, let's talk about medieval hygiene. Toilet paper? Absolute myth. Didn't exist. If nature called, you used a communal wooden bucket.
When that bad boy was full, you took it to the window, shouted Gardy-loo, which was basically medieval for watch out below, and dumped your waste directly into the open street. The streets of medieval towns were essentially just open, flowing sewers. Now, heaven forbid you actually got sick from those streets, because medieval medicine was basically polite torture. Doctors weren't using science. They relied on this wildly inaccurate theory of the four humors. If you had a fever, they diagnosed you with too much blood and prescribed leeches and bloodletting. Feeling a little anxious? Well, clearly that's an excess of black bile, so you were immediately given warm herbal laxatives. You weren't really healing, you were literally just trying to survive the cure. That brings us to part 4, Catherine's ambition and empire. Let's step completely out of the medieval muck and transition into our final acts, where we're going to challenge the highly persistent myth of the passive historical woman. We'll be looking at some incredible paradigms of female power, starting in 18th century Russia. Think about this transformation because it's one of the most astonishing in all of history. Sophie was this obscure, poorly dressed 14-year-old German princess when she arrived in Russia in 1744, just to marry the heir to the throne. But she absolutely didn't just sit back and play the quiet wife. She learned the language, she read Voltaire, and she strategically cultivated military allies in the shadows. By 1762, she launched a meticulously planned, totally bloodless coup against her own husband and crowned herself Empress Catherine II. She literally took an empire through sheer will and political genius. And her impact? 200,000. That is the staggering number of square miles Catherine added to the Russian Empire during her reign. Think about that for a second. She didn't just inherit power, she vastly expanded it, proving herself to be a ruthless, brilliant, and incredibly effective ruler on the global stage. All right, part 5, the Maya's Red Queen. We're trading the freezing palaces of Russia for the humid depths of the Chiapas jungle in southern Mexico. And here we find a completely different, yet equally profound example of historical female power. Picture this. It's 1994, and archaeologists make a startling discovery inside Temple 13 at the ruins of Palenque. They find a pristine, sealed sarcophagus. When they carefully pry it open, this massive cloud of brilliant red dust rises into the air. This was cinnabar. It's a highly toxic mercury sulfide that the Maya used to symbolize blood, rebirth, and the divine life force. And the royal skeleton inside? It was completely enveloped in this dangerous, sacred red powder. Now, the crucial, absolute, mind-blowing point here is this. When we look inside the Red Queen's tomb, there are 0 inscriptions identifying who she is. No name at all. Yet, she was buried with this delicate jade mosaic death mask, ritual bone needles, and she was placed in a pyramid directly next to the famous king, Pakal the Great. That is the ultimate dynastic status symbol. So despite the total lack of a carved name, the staggering wealth of her tomb and its proximity to the king's resting place prove undeniably that she held immense spiritual, political, and dynastic weight in the Maya world. And that leads us right into part 6, redefining women in history. We've seen an empress who boldly seized an empire, and a queen who commanded divine reverence even in death. Let's pull all this together in our final section to shatter the myth of female historical erasure once and for all. Look at Eleanor of Aquitaine from the 12th century, for example. As this quote just perfectly captures, she ruled not through armies, but through influence, the most enduring weapon of all. She outwitted kings, she shaped the whole concept of courtly love, and she essentially rewrote the morality of her era. She basically made scandal itself a form of immortality. The real takeaway here? Soft power and influence can so often outlast brute military force. These women were definitely not passive footnotes. They were the main characters driving our history forward. So we've stripped away the shining armor to see the fleas, we've pulled the curtain completely back on the petty gods, and we've illuminated the true, undeniable power of historical women. So I want to leave you with this final provocative thought. If so much of our past has been meticulously cleaned up and turned into a fairy tale, how much of today's history is currently being romanticized or mythologized right before our very eyes? Keep questioning those neat, clean narratives you're sold. Thanks for exploring the messy reality with me.